Welcome everyone to Untapped. I'm joined today by Sean Simpson from Veeam. Sean, good afternoon.
Hello, Ernesto. How are you today?
I'm doing fine, thank you. Doing fine. Pleasure is mine. We're going to be covering continuous data protection (CDP) from Veeam today on the Untapped series. I appreciate you joining. For those who don't know me, Ernesto Pellegrino, CTO at Assurance IT, and again joined by Sean Simpson, Senior System Engineer at Veeam.
Yep, thanks, Ernesto. Yep, I work with service providers, Veeam Cloud service providers throughout the Northeast and Canada, helping them develop strategies so that they can work with their tenants and provide them the best data protection around.
Awesome. Thanks again, Sean, for joining. So, some housekeeping notes really before we start. For those who have never joined the Untapped series, 25-minute conversation around a key feature. Like I mentioned today, we're going to be focusing on CDP. So, housekeeping notes, questions. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the comment section in LinkedIn, and we'll address those at the end of the conversation. Right. The main focus today is and why you should stay tuned for 25 minutes is really what is continuous data protection, also known as CDP, why CDP is important, right? The requirements you need, the architecture review of what it's needed to deploy CDP in your environment. And then we'll drive through a quick demo where we'll showcase the UI interface on how to configure CDP, and Sean's going to help us with that. So make sure to be tuned and stay tuned throughout the presentation. So continuous data protection, right? What is it all about? It's a technology that helps you protect mission critical VMware virtual machines, right? Continuous data protection is built on top of VMware's vSphere's APIs for IO and allows VMs to be replicated with near zero RPOs. I think that's the key, right? Getting those RPOs to near zero for those mission critical VMs. Essentially, Veeam's CDP is intercepting those IOs as they happen in a predefined policy. For those who use Veeam replication feature, right, you set those replication policies, and they're typically set to 15 minutes. But with CDP, you're allowed to get them to near zero, right? And get them from the source right to your destination, your secondary data center, to your vSphere host. Those replicas will allow you to get them from your VMware environment, again, to your second VMware environment or your second infrastructure sitting on your secondary site. So that VAIO mechanism allows those lower RPOs than you would traditionally get with your snapshot-based replications that you see today in your VMware, in your Veeam replication jobs. So for snapshot-based replication, it's generally 15 minutes where we set those policies, right? We're able to get those 15-minute RPOs. And with CDP, you can set those to nearly seconds, right? Because CDP is always on, it does not create snapshot, and it allows you to lower those RPOs and get those tier one VMs to where you want them to be.
And probably some of the best, the best part about this is, if you have the Enterprise Plus version of Veeam and you're on, version 11 currently
Mhm.
today in a single instance, this is available today. There's nothing else to purchase. There's no additional cost, and essentially you have the ability to do CDP snapshot based replication as well as the traditional snapshots based backup. So we're all giving you three different ways to back up your data based, like you said, Ernesto, based on the RPO that's going to best serve that particular workload
Makes
within a
sense.
single solution.
Yeah, no, definitely, right? So depending on those tiers, right, organizations tend to tier their VMs or their infrastructure in tiers, right? Tier one, tier two, tier three. Tier one being the most critical, right? And
Right.
essentially those tier one VMs need that near zero, right? And now Veeam gives you the capability to get that done,
Who,
right?
every department's going to feel that they're a tier one, right? So it's going to be someone's job to make that tough decision which one is actually a tier one. But like I said, it's a little bit easier in this case because there's really you're not going to be paying, an exorbitant amount of fee for
Yeah,
each one of these VMs. So it does make your decision a little bit easier when you're doing that continuity planning as well.
absolutely, absolutely. So it drives us on to the next slide, right? Disaster recovery for tier one VMware workloads, right? One of the questions I get from our customers is, and I'll hand it off to you, Sean, is when if the CDP feature is available, do I leverage CDP for all my VM replications? Do I move away from VMware snapshots?
Yeah, that would, it would be real easy to do that and say, I have it available, let me do this. But we still want to have some good common sense business continuity disaster recovery practices put into place. We really want to leave those tier one for those applications that we need up and running to keep the core business moving forward. And when we do our, analysis of that, we really want to make sure that any application that is business critical falls into that tier one CDP sort of a slot, and we want to make sure that RPO is less than 15 minutes. So it gives us the ability to determine which applications fall into that tier one, and then
Right.
obviously from there we can go to tier two and tier three. So I still think you want to take a good look at that, and you want to be practical in your selection for these applications from that near zero. Not that Veeam couldn't handle it, but obviously we want to make smart decisions when we're planning our recovery and our backup and our replication.
Right. That makes sense, right? Because there are some additional features, or there are some additional functions or sets that you need to add in your Veeam for CDP to function, which we'll see in a couple of minutes. But before we get there, I'm just going to highlight or the key use cases, the key benefits right around it. Really, one, again, no VMware snapshots when you're leveraging CDP. It leverages VMware's IO filter. That's number one. Number two, and I think this one's key. I think this is a big one, right? No workload or hardware dependency. So when organizations, Sean, like when they're thinking about disaster recovery, business continuity for those tier one VMs, they typically tend to leverage array-based replication, right? Storage
Right.
subsystems, and they get locked in, right? So
Correct.
they call the vendor, they get to say, hey, I need to replicate these VMs. They're critical. I need near zero. The vendor really locks them into purchasing two arrays, right? One on each
Right.
side. In this case, we take it up a layer, right? And we move into software-based replication, and you're not locked in anymore, right? You're not tied
Correct.
in, right? You can get that array for your site one where you need those IOPS and you need that IO, but in the secondary site, you can leverage what you have, or you can leverage any other array because we're bringing it up a layer with software. So I think that's key.
100%. Yeah, and that goes along with the Veeams, being hardware agnostic, storage agnostic. And then also, I will just mention, with that IO filter from VMware, um, the reason that Veeam wanted CDP to come out much sooner, it took time. It was sort of like a joke that, when's it coming? When's it coming? And when it did come out, the reason for that is because they worked very closely with VMware to make sure that this solution was certified, so that if you did have issues and you contacted VMware, it was a certified solution with VMware from that standpoint as well.
Well said, right? So again, and getting certified and being built in with VMware, they allow you to bake it in with a built-in assistant, no deployment guesswork, right? Get in there and we'll drive through the demo later and we'll show you, right? No guesswork. Built-in assistant helps you deploy that CDP function and feature across your Veeam backup replication. And as you mentioned earlier, right, one of the key benefits, no extra cost. It's included with your universal license, or if you're leveraging VCSP, with your
Uh-huh.
rental, with your
Yep.
rental, right?
And like you said, Ernesto, it's going to have the look and feel of Veeam. So it's not like learning a whole nother solution. It's going
Yeah,
to be very similar.
exactly. Through that same interface, that same console, just additional features to get you where you need to be
Correct.
for your tier one VMs. So just to recap, right? Veeam 11, V11, that's when that feature was introduced, and what are the drivers for change? So why should organizations look at CDP, move towards CDP, or or leverage CDP to enhance their business continuity? I think that's one of the big drivers for changes. Look at your DR plans and see, is it a fit, and which VMs are a fit for that CDP feature. Again, by allowing you to leverage CDP, you're able to meet your internal and external SLAs, reduce that RPO, reduce that RTO. And the last point, like I mentioned earlier, it's associated cost and complexity. By bringing in third-party vendors or bringing in a subsystem really to drive that DR, all built in into Veeam, integrated features and functions, and it has that one single pane of glass to initiate your backups, your cloud backups, and disaster recovery as a service. I think that it's key, right? So, Sean, I'm not sure if you want to add anything there.
No, I really think it is. It's we've had a lot of partners, a lot of tenants wait a long time for this opportunity to be able to have continuous data protection within Veeam. So it was a long anticipated release. Right now, currently, we're at Veeam 11A. The CDP can support vCloud Director, VMware. So it really does give tenants and partners the opportunity to meet those three tiers of data, like we mentioned, tier one, tier two, and tier three from that standpoint. And again, being able to do it within a single pane of glass is huge. During a disaster, um, the last thing you want to do is have to manage multiple systems, multiple solutions. It just makes it, I guess the more different solutions, the more chances of something not working during a true disaster.
Absolutely. Try to reduce that footprint to the least possible, right? So
Control the things you can
control.
control, right?
Exactly. Exactly. Well said. So now we're going to drive into that backup infrastructure for CDP. What are the requirements? Again, 10,000 foot view of what's needed to get it deployed. Sean, I'll let you review this and go through the slide.
Sure. So yeah, at the top there on the top right is the Veeam backup server. So at this point, a Veeam software version of Enterprise Plus for continuous data protection. It's included uh, in that release. The biggest difference that you're going to see is what we would call, if you're familiar with, the Veeam solution, is our proxies, and the proxies are really the muscle that's moving the data. Anytime I do a Veeam 101 type of a overview, I always call the backup server sort of like the brains. I call the proxies here the muscle. And then obviously in this case, we have our target cluster. So the one thing will notice is there is a source CDP proxy and a target CDP proxy. Very similar to the snapshot based replication where you would need a proxy on both sides. But in this case, it's the CDP proxy, which would be deployed on a virtual machine, hardware agnostic. As long as it meets CPU memory requirements, you're good to go. So it's really not many added components to your Veeam infrastructure to be able to do the continuous data protection from that standpoint. It's pretty straightforward. And once you have these CDP proxies added into the environment, you'll be set and ready to go in and configure your first CDP replication job from that standpoint
Awesome.
within
Well
the
said.
solution.
So this, like we mentioned, details at a quick glance what it would look like. So one of the questions that I typically get is in terms of the source VMware CDP proxy. We know with snapshot based replication we support um, Windows and Linux proxies. Is it the same case for CDP?
Yes, I believe in version 12, the Linux proxy will be available. Correct. Yep. Mhm.
Awesome. Okay, and I guess next step would be to drive right in and get a UI demo, right, and get to see what it
Yeah,
really.
let's just take a quick snapshot of what this is going to look like. So, we can say what it's going to look like, but seeing is believing, so to speak, from that standpoint. I'm a visual learner myself. And actually, you can see here, I don't know if you want to review this slide first, Ernesto, before I get into it, but you can see there's a short term and a long term sort of retention within CDP. The short term being able to roll back, within a certain period of time, like we mentioned before, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 15 minutes, 20
Yeah.
minutes, 30 minutes, and then a long term retention where you might have more of a long term retention that's needed for 8 hours or 16 hours or something like that. So we we do provide both a short term and a long term retention within the CDP. And then, of course, we list here some, core benefits here, like we've kind of, hammered, but it's very important, near continuous data protection. So in the past with the snapshot-based replication, we would say 15 minutes, which is pretty good. If you could
Right.
get back to the
Right.
last, if I can get the last 15 minutes back of certain things I've done in life, I would take that. But if I could go to near zero when I make a wrong decision or a wrong choice, I would love that even more. Frequent recovery points, so we can have multiple recovery points. So, for example, if there is a malicious attack and we can pinpoint when that happened, we know exactly where to go back to revert before that issue happened and be able to recover from that. And that's probably one of the biggest things with ransomware and malware.
Right.
things like that nowadays. Better recovery times, obviously being able to do that failover and come up instantaneously. Um, I think nowadays people are so customers, people that might depend on our tenants or people that are using Veeam, they're so accustomed to instant gratification, right? That you go to a website, you go on an application, and as soon as you get the spinning wheel, how quickly we'll
Yeah.
revert back, right? If it's not there, we lose the interest of everyone, and it's
X.
so important.
Press the
Yeah.
X, right?
Exactly. And then item level recovery, minimal effort, and more time for other issues. So, you know, if we plan right and we have a disaster, all these things should come together. And technically speaking, the customer, the person on the other end, should never even know that there's a problem if
Yeah.
everything went off without a hitch. And that's really what we're about. So, I don't know if you want to add anything to this slide before we kind of drive into
Well,
the
I
example.
like the point you made, right? If you plan right, right? When we're talking about DR, business continuity, it's all about planning and testing, right? And
Testing.
we see a lot of organizations, right? They're working on it, they choose the solution, whatever it may be, right? And they put it in place, and they don't have those frequent testing plans. It's
Yep.
key because you don't want to start testing during an event, right? You want to make sure you have a build book or an orchestrator, as we're going to see in our next Untapped series, right? Where you can automate that function, or you could automate those recovery points, and they've been tested on a regular basis, so there's no surprises. And I think that's where a lot of organizations are lacking. So just to add that, right, this feature allows you to get that RTO and RPO where you want it to be, and just continue testing those recovery point objectives and those recovery time objectives, testing those recovery plans, because it is key to get a successful business continuity plan in place.
Yep. I think, yeah, testing. Testing is this, you can't test enough. And
Repeat
I think
testing.
it's forgotten because the problem is then the finger comes right down to the person that's in charge of the backups.
That's exactly what it looks like, right? In every organization, and nobody wants that finger being pointed at them, right?
In the
So
old days, it was, I'll date myself because I fell into this career not knowing what I was getting into, 20 plus years ago, and it's become a career and I love it. But, I used to work at a recovery center where they would roll in the 18 wheelers with the tapes and they'd start spinning tape, and then they'd realize that they haven't backed up any data to the tapes and they say their test failed. And my comment always was, well, did it really fail, or did you just realize that you have no data? You'd rather know you don't have data during a test than during an actual event, because at least now we can fix the problem. So,
yeah, exactly. Avoid the finger pointing situation, right?
exactly. Yep. And as you can see, this is Veeam backup and replication. The biggest difference here is right now I am in the replication, and I went into a job just to kind of show you here what it would look like to set up a job. Like I mentioned before, if you're used to Veeam, Veeam does a really good job of walking you through the setup. I always laugh and I say, I started at Veeam about 4 years ago in August. At that time, my son, I think, was 11. And I downloaded the free version of the backup for a laptop. And I said, Brady, I want you to set this up. And not even knowing what he was doing, he was able to set up a backup job in a laptop. Now, granted, at 11 years old, they had a much, much more computer savvy mind than I did when I was at 11 because I didn't have this technology. But just to say it's that easy, anyone can kind of set this up. And as you can see here, we would give a name to our backup job here. And then we will be able to get into uh, we're going to walk through this. There's advanced controls, so we can do things like replica seeding, network remapping,
Right.
replica re-IP, so that when we do fail over, we will have the network connectivity for our end users to get into. So it's one thing to be able to fail over to another machine and bring it up, but if no one can get to it, it's really not going to do you any good. So we need to make sure that we have the networking in place from that standpoint. And then we have the ability to select the virtual machine. So very similar to a backup job or a snapshot based replication job, we're able to add servers. We can do exclusion. So if there were certain files or folders or things that we wanted to exclude, we could do that. It's also really neat down here in the bottom right hand corner, we get a total size of that virtual machine, or the total size of all the virtual machines. So we get a running tally of exactly what the size is going to be. So we know from a standpoint of what type of hardware we need on the other side, we'll have that in place. And then we can also determine where we want, what host or cluster do we want this to point to? Is it a resource pool, the VM folder, the data store? From a network standpoint, here I picked two networks. These happen to be my lab networks. And then from a RE-IP perspective, we have the source and the target, so that we can say, point this dot 136 to 137 in the event of an actual failover. We're able to do that. And then we start to get into job settings, replica settings from that standpoint. As you can see here, we want to restore points to keep. So in this case, we can keep a certain number of restore points. In this case, it's 7. If we hit advanced settings, it'll pop up and we can exclude swap files, deleted block files. There's different notifications that we can set up in here within vSphere integrations. If we do want to have any scripts run prior to or before for different things, we're able to do that as well.
Sean, for Veeam users, for users that have used Veeam, right now, you went through the wizard, and there's really no difference between a replication job right now, as we see, and CDP, right? It's the
Correct.
next couple of steps that are really detailed, whether you leverage the CDP infrastructure.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Because we get to similar to data transfer through built-in WAN accelerators. We can use those, obviously, if we need to, not copy everything over. Seating and scheduling. So then if I go from here, if I cancel out of here and I say no, and I go up to my home, let's cancel this, yes, and I go home and I go replication job and I go vSphere. I'm sorry, let me go to CDP policy here. Oop, it's not going to let me get in there. So we might have to hop back to those slides for a second so I can kind of talk a little bit about that. Let me see here. Hold on one second. Policy, where'd it go? Might have to hop back over, but object storage, CDP. Not sure why it's not letting me in there. Hold on one second. If we want to go back to those slides, I can talk a little bit about the differences that you were mentioning a moment ago.
Absolutely. We'll just get back to those slides.
Yeah,
There we go.
so
There we go.
similar like you said here, there
This is
is a CDP
the
proxy
CDP server. Yep.
up on the Linux. So like you said, you could do that. And this is where you start to get to your recovery point objective, where you can select the drop down. So it could be seconds, minutes, hours, and you have that uh, point in time recovery. So you can do like a full sort of backup every X number of hours so that you have a full sort of copy as well in case you need to go back to a specific time. And then you have your long-term retention. So we can create additional restore points every 8 hours, and we can keep those for 7 days. So if for some reason we needed to go back to a specific point in time, we're able to do that from that standpoint.
So
So we have,
one of the key differences, right? So the recovery point objective, as you can see here on the top part of the slide, is 15 seconds. Where if you're leveraging VM based snapshot, it's typically 15 minutes, right? So there, when we talk about near zero, here's where it showcases that through the wizard.
yeah, that would be correct. Yeah, and then we say 15 minutes, and then it depends. Obviously, if you're doing snapshot-based backup, 15 minutes is real good. And realistically, it's probably more like 30 minutes, right? Depending on the size. So we go from really like 15 to 30 minutes to 15 seconds now. So it's a
That's all.
huge improvement from that standpoint. And then there's a slider here. So as you can see, like let's just say we needed to recover back to a specific point end time. This little here can actually slide. So I
Right.
can slide to where I want to recover to a specific point in time. So it allows us to be able to recover within a specific point in time. And actually, think of it sort of like, when you're watching a movie and you're scrolling across the bottom, you want to get to a particular point in time in the movie, or you miss something and you want to go back. Very similar to that. You can control that slider and go back to a specific point in time within the replication to recover. And so it makes
Fantastic.
it very easy and very simple from that standpoint. With that being said,
I think we're done for the slides. I think we're done for the slides. So, Sean, how do you think we did? Did we cover CDP and why it's so important?
I think we covered that, and I think you did a really great job explaining how we can have everything in one software, one pane of glass, and really be able to meet sort of that tier one, tier two, and tier three requirements without breaking the bank, so to speak, from that
Exactly.
standpoint.
Yeah, no, definitely those were the three key takeaways, right, from the discussion today, right? Great points. Is it available today? Yes, it is. It's available in version 11, as we mentioned. It will be available in version 12 for customers looking to leverage service providers for cloud backup and disaster recovery as a service. So tenants that are using service providers today are able to leverage replication technology, snapshot-based technology, to move your data from your source to the service provider. The ones that leverage like I said, the service provider and move their data versus having their on-site, their secondary site managed by them. They leverage a service provider's tenant in order to move that data over. In version 12, CDP will also be available. So you can add that level of enhancement to your tier one virtual machines in order to move your tier ones to your service provider. Again, with the objective of moving away from CapEx, having to purchase all that equipment in the secondary data center, and moving that to an OpEx based formula where you leverage service provider shared resources and you get that moved off to the cloud. So that's coming in version 12 CDP for Cloud Connect, available in version 11 for customers that have their own secondary site. So feel free to leverage it, use it, and take advantage of the near zero replication technology to get those RPOs and RTOs really to near zero. So
Great.
what's next? What's next, Sean? What are we doing next? August 23rd.
Looks like we're going to be talking a little bit about Veeam Availability Orchestrator and how the Veeam Availability Orchestrator can be combined with Veeam Backup and Replication to automate some of the tasks for your disaster recovery testing, as well as in the event that you actually have a disruption and you need to fail over. So we're going to share with you the ability and how we can automate some of that so that you don't have as much to worry about at an actual event and you can focus on other things with that.
Awesome, Sean. Thanks. Thank you again for taking the time today, Sean. Really appreciate it as always. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. I'm not sure if we have any questions in the chat. We'll just take a look. Well, it seems like we already answered the question throughout the slide. So we did a great job, Sean. We did a great job.
Great job. It was a pleasure being here today. And thank you for the
Awesome.
opportunity to share.
Perfect. Thank you very much again, and look forward to that conversation on August 23rd. Everyone, feel free to tune in, click the subscribe button, and hopefully we'll see you then.